Hello, listener. It's time to dive into the Juniverse, where tales of infidelity, betrayal, and heart-wrenching confessions pull you into the vast unknown.
Adam Blake had always prided himself on the steady pace of his life. A 30-year-old software architect, he lived comfortably in a small but charming apartment in the city. Nestled away from the chaos of busy streets, his work was fulfilling, the paycheck decent enough to not worry about bills or luxuries, but not enough to be called extravagant. It was a life that provided just the right balance, simple, quiet, and peaceful. The same could be said about his relationship with Sophie. Sophie, 29, worked as a marketing manager for a mid-sized company. Her career was on a similar trajectory, steady, dependable, but not show-stopping. Adam and Sophie had come from humble beginnings. They both understood the value of hard work, and neither of them had ever expected a life of unimaginable wealth. They believed in building a future together through mutual understanding and trust, not through the pursuit of status or possessions. And for the first couple of years, that belief had served them well. Adam bought Sophie little things now and then, a piece of jewelry here, a spontaneous dinner there. They took vacations every so often, but nothing too extravagant, just enough to enjoy the world beyond their work. Sophie never seemed to mind the modest lifestyle. At least, that's what Adam thought. He didn't know it yet, but her contentment was about to change. It was subtle at first, a hint of a longing glance when she scrolled through social media. A quick comment about how her friend had gotten a brand new car or a luxurious gift from her partner. Sophie had always liked nice things, but Adam had never imagined it would evolve into something deeper. She had never been the type to demand designer brands, but gradually, the casual comments became more frequent, and her requests shifted from simple luxuries to extravagant ones. "Why don't we live like they do?" Sophie would often say with a soft sigh, scrolling through pictures of couples in private jets or friends holding expensive designer bags. It wasn't about a little luxury anymore. Sophie seemed to be growing restless. She wasn't asking for a new handbag here and there, she wanted more. She wanted the life she saw flaunted by influencers, with perfectly staged Instagram posts of flawless lives, mansions, and vacations that felt out of reach for someone like Adam. She wanted the kind of life that didn't worry about paying the next month's rent. Sophie began talking more about what people like us could achieve if only they weren't so tied down by practicality. She mentioned how her friend's boyfriend surprised her with a private yacht party for her birthday, or how an influencer's husband bought her a second vacation home. These conversations weren't casual anymore. They were filled with longing, with envy, and with an unspoken accusation. Why can't we have that? Adam tried to push aside the nagging feeling that something was amiss. He believed Sophie had simply become caught up in the glamour of social media, the need to keep up with the Joneses, as the saying goes. But as Sophie's desires grew, Adam found himself on the edge of a precipice, unsure if he could continue to fulfill these new, endless demands. He started noticing the changes more clearly. Sophie had once been content with simple vacations to the countryside, but now, when Adam suggested a weekend getaway, she would roll her eyes and suggest somewhere more exclusive. She began comparing their home to the lavish apartments of her colleagues, and even started showing visible frustration when Adam's salary didn't stretch as far as she wanted. And then, just when Adam thought he had adjusted, Sophie dropped it. "We need to live like the influencers do. It's time we stop settling." She wanted to take their modest, comfortable life and turn it into something that felt far more like a chase for the next big thing. But Adam was scared that what she really wanted was not just to live better, but to live larger, at any cost. It was clear now, this wasn't a mere phase. Sophie's hunger for luxury was insatiable, and as much as Adam wanted to give her the world, he couldn't help but wonder, was it enough to just live a simple life together? Or was she searching for something he could never provide? Sophie's growing desire for material wealth had started to take a toll on their relationship, slowly turning the comfortable life they'd built together into something Adam no longer recognized. What had once seemed like small, almost harmless indulgences began to spiral into a full-blown obsession with status. Sophie, who had always been content with modest luxuries, now began to crave something far more extravagant. The occasional dinner at a nice restaurant turned into demands for designer handbags, expensive shoes, and private shopping sprees. Vacations, which had once been simple getaways, were now about 5-star resorts and private villas in exotic locations. Adam found himself overwhelmed by the constant pressure to provide a lifestyle he hadn't prepared for. One that he couldn't afford, not without compromising everything he stood for. It wasn't just about the things Sophie wanted anymore. It was about who she wanted to become, as someone that could be envied, admired, and envied again. The girl who had once laughed at the idea of showing off now reveled in the attention that came with wearing high-end brands. Adam could see it in her eyes whenever she picked up something new, a little glint of pride, as if the label itself had become her identity. One evening, when Sophie came home dressed in a form-fitting, designer dress, her lips painted a striking shade of red, Adam's suspicions finally hit a breaking point. Sophie, who had always been practical in her clothing choices, now looked as if she was living a completely different life. The dress was one of those showstopper pieces, a floor-length gown that could have been worn at a gala. She paired it with a stunning gold necklace and a handbag that had an unmistakable logo. It was the third designer handbag in the last 2 months, none of which Adam had bought. As Sophie twirled in front of the mirror, checking herself out with an air of satisfaction, Adam felt a sharp pang in his chest. She was transforming, and not into the woman he had married. This wasn't the woman who once cared about the little things in life. The little things were no longer enough. What bothered him even more was how she seemed to be changing for an audience he wasn't part of, the one that lived in a world of luxury that Adam would never be a part of. Adam had always been cautious with money, but he was also honest and open with Sophie. Their shared finances had been an area of trust, until now. That night, after Sophie left to meet some friends, Adam decided to dig into their bank statements. What he found made his stomach churn. There were purchases that didn't fit the lifestyle they had always lived, a flight to an exclusive resort, a set of designer shoes that cost more than his monthly rent, and, most telling of all, a charge for a new credit card he had never seen before, one that he had no memory of opening. He checked their shared credit card statement and found thousands of dollars spent on clothing, accessories, and luxury items. But none of those purchases had been made by him. Sophie's salary, while decent, couldn't possibly cover these costs. Adam knew his wife wasn't hiding money or savings, and he had never authorized such purchases. Panic rose in his throat as he realized that this wasn't just irresponsible spending, it was deceit. In a rush of disbelief, Adam went into their bedroom and began searching through Sophie's things. He pulled out the drawers, scouring them with mounting urgency. It wasn't until he opened a drawer full of Sophie's old, untouched purses that he saw them. Receipts, crumpled and hidden at the bottom. He unfolded them one by one, each revealing purchases for items he hadn't bought. Gucci, Prada, and Chanel. Some of the bags alone were worth more than Adam made in a month. The weight of it all hit him in waves. Sophie had been hiding this from him, sneaking around behind his back, spending money he didn't know about. And it wasn't just her careless habits, it was the realization that something much darker was going on. Sophie had crossed a line, one Adam hadn't expected. She wasn't just shopping anymore. She was living a life that Adam didn't even know she wanted, one he could never afford to give her. His mind raced with the possibilities. Where was the money coming from? Was she using his credit cards without telling him? Or was something even more sinister at play? The next few minutes felt like an eternity as Adam tried to make sense of the betrayal. Finally, he put the receipts down, took a deep breath, and realized that Sophie wasn't just chasing material wealth, she was chasing a life that he could never give her. When Sophie returned home that evening, Adam confronted her. The tension in the room was thick, every word charged with the weight of what he had discovered. Sophie's eyes widened as Adam placed the receipts on the table in front of her. The evidence of her betrayal laid bare. The silence between them felt like it could last forever. Adam's pulse thundered in his ears as he stood in front of Sophie. The evidence of her betrayal laid out before her: designer bags, receipts for extravagant purchases, and luxurious gifts she had hidden from him. It all felt unreal, like he was watching a nightmare unfold. The woman he had trusted with everything, the woman he thought he knew, had been living a secret life behind his back. At first, Sophie tried to defend herself, her eyes wide with surprise. She tried to laugh it off, dismissing Adam's accusations as ridiculous. "What's the big deal, Adam? It's just some bags and clothes," she muttered, her voice betraying an uncomfortable tightness. But Adam wasn't having any of it. He pressed her harder, pointing to the receipts. To the lavish lifestyle she had been leading with money he couldn't trace, money that didn't belong to him. The facade started to crack. It wasn't long before Sophie's defenses crumbled. But what Adam hadn't expected was the complete lack of remorse in her eyes. She didn't seem sorry, she was just tired of pretending. Sophie stood there, arms crossed, with an air of cold indifference, as if she had already made peace with what she had done. Adam's heart sank as Sophie's words cut through the tension. "You don't understand, Adam," she said, her voice more irritated than apologetic. "Nathan is different. He's everything you're not. He's rich, he's powerful, and he gives me the things I've always wanted. He understands me." Adam felt the ground beneath him shift as her words hit him with the force of a freight train. Sophie had been seeing someone else, a man who could give her the life she had always dreamed of. A man who had swept her off her feet with promises of more, promises of luxury, promises that Adam could never afford to make. A wealthy real estate mogul named Nathan, whose grand gestures and lavish gifts had blinded Sophie to the life they had built together. For a moment, Adam couldn't speak. His mind raced, his thoughts spinning out of control. Was it possible that the woman he had loved had never truly been satisfied with him? Was everything they had shared just a stepping stone to something greater in her eyes? The betrayal was more than just infidelity, it was the realization that Sophie had been using him all along. Using the life he had provided to get closer to a man who could offer her everything she craved. The pain gnawed at Adam's insides, tearing him apart. Sophie had never been the type to care for wealth in the way she did now. Yet here she was, admitting that it was exactly what she wanted. He had spent years building a life with her, providing for her, trusting her. But all that time, she had been planning to leave him for a man who could provide more. And then, like a final blow, Sophie spoke the words that sealed their fate. "I'm leaving you, Adam. Nathan and I are going to be together. He's everything I've been looking for. He's giving me everything you couldn't." Adam's breath caught in his throat. The words felt like daggers being driven into his chest. He had suspected her betrayal, but hearing it out loud, hearing her so casually drop the bombshell, was unbearable. She wasn't even sad about it. She wasn't even sorry. To her, this was just the next step in her pursuit of a life filled with wealth and luxury. The life Adam could never provide, no matter how hard he tried. "You're just too practical," Sophie continued, almost dismissively. "You're always thinking about what's sensible, what's affordable. But Nathan, he gets me. He gives me the life I deserve." Adam's world collapsed in that moment. The life they had built together, the memories they had shared, all of it was worthless in Sophie's eyes. She had been chasing a fantasy, a dream that had nothing to do with love, with trust, with the bond they had shared. To her, their marriage was just another chapter in a story that was about to end. The woman Adam had loved had just admitted she had been with him for his financial security, and now that she had found someone who could offer her more, she was walking away without a second thought. Adam didn't waste another second. There was no room for hesitation, no space for lingering emotions. His heart was raw. His mind clouded with a mix of anger, betrayal, and disbelief, but his actions were clear. He moved quickly, methodically. This wasn't a moment for sentiment. It was time to reclaim his life. He started with Sophie's things, packing them into boxes with a coldness that surprised even him. Each item he touched, her clothes, her makeup, the expensive perfume she used, felt like a reminder of the life she had taken from him. It was almost as if, by packing them away, he could wipe her out of his world completely. He couldn't bring himself to say a word to her as he shoved her things into bags. There was nothing left to say. Sophie had already made her choice. Once he was done, Adam shoved the suitcase into her hands and walked her out the door. She protested, of course, begging him to listen, telling him it wasn't too late to fix things. But Adam couldn't look her in the eye. The woman he had once loved was gone, replaced by someone else, a woman who only cared about luxury, about appearances, about the next big thing. Sophie left that night, without a second glance. She walked out, empty-handed, but with Nathan waiting on the other side, ready to offer her everything Adam couldn't. And just like that, the life they had shared for so long was over. It didn't take long for Adam's world to turn upside down. Sophie, now with Nathan, embraced the lavish lifestyle she had always craved. It was as though she had been born for this life, as if all the years spent with Adam were nothing more than a rehearsal for the grand performance she was now starring in. Sophie quickly became a fixture on social media, sharing every moment of her new life with Nathan. Private yacht parties, glamorous vacations in tropical locations, exclusive shopping sprees. Sophie's feed was flooded with images of the life Adam had never been able to give her. Designer dresses, trips to Paris, crystal champagne flutes clinking on luxury yachts. The reality of Sophie's new world was in stark contrast to the life she had left behind with him. It was almost as if she was rubbing it in, flaunting the life she had won. Sophie posted pictures of herself surrounded by wealth, grinning ear to ear with Nathan by her side, as if to declare to the world that she had finally found what she deserved. It was a constant stream of luxury, each photo more extravagant than the last, and Adam couldn't escape it. Every time he opened his phone, there it was, the life Sophie was now living, a life he was never a part of. And with each post, Adam's anger grew. It wasn't just that she had left him for another man. It was the way she acted as though their time together had never mattered. To Sophie, he was just a footnote in her past, a chapter that had ended and was now forgotten. She no longer seemed to care that she had shattered his world, and now, with Nathan, she was free to chase her dreams without a single regret. Adam, on the other hand, was left alone, watching from the sidelines. He didn't respond to Sophie's calls or messages. He didn't engage in the public drama she had created. Instead, he focused on rebuilding, on finding himself again in a world that had suddenly felt foreign. It wasn't easy. The loneliness, the betrayal, it all weighed heavily on him. There were nights when he would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment Sophie walked out of his life. But he never allowed himself to look back. And yet, he couldn't escape the pictures. Sophie's new life was a constant reminder of everything he had lost. The woman he had trusted had been living a lie, and now she was out there, living her best life. Adam tried to shut out the bitterness that crept up in his heart every time he saw a post. He tried to tell himself it didn't matter, that he was better off without her. But the truth was, it hurt. It hurt more than he wanted to admit. Sophie was out there, thriving in a world of excess, while he was left to pick up the pieces of his life. And the worst part? She didn't even seem to notice how badly she had hurt him. She had won. Months passed since Sophie walked out of Adam's life. In that time, he had worked through his pain, focusing on what was left for him. He threw himself into his career, picked up old hobbies that had been long neglected, and even reconnected with friends he hadn't seen in years. Each day, the weight of the betrayal grew lighter, and Adam began to rebuild himself, brick by brick. He had learned the hard way that love, when built on a foundation of materialism and lies, could crumble in an instant. And as the months went by, he convinced himself that he was better off without Sophie, the woman who had thrown away their life together for the promise of wealth. But just as Adam thought he had moved on, Sophie made an unexpected return. It started with a simple text message. At first, Adam dismissed it. She had reached out before, but this time, something felt different. The messages started piling up. "I miss you," Sophie wrote. "I'm sorry. I've made a huge mistake. Can we talk? Please, just give me a chance." Adam ignored them all at first. What could she possibly have to say to him after everything that had happened? Her words were empty to him now. Just another round of manipulative pleas to make herself feel better about the mess she'd created. But then, one evening, as he was scrolling through his phone, a new message came through. This one made his heart stop. "I messed up. I need you. Can we talk?" The words hit him like a punch to the gut. The woman who had shattered his world with her deceit, the woman who had walked out of his life without a second glance, was now asking for his forgiveness. His first instinct was to ignore her completely, to keep his distance and not fall into her trap. But something inside him, perhaps a sliver of lingering hope or curiosity, made him reply. He agreed to meet her, but only in a public place. No private meetings, no one-on-one confrontations. Just somewhere neutral, where he could maintain control. When Adam saw Sophie, he could hardly believe his eyes. The woman who had once been the picture of confidence and ambition was gone. In her place stood a broken version of the woman he had loved. Sophie was no longer wearing the designer clothes that used to define her. Instead, she was dressed in a plain, faded dress that hung off her frail frame. Her hair, once perfectly styled, was now a mess of untamed curls. There was no makeup, no mask to hide the exhaustion etched on her face. Her eyes, once filled with ambition and desire, were now dull, devoid of the sparkle that Adam had once admired. Sophie looked tired, so much older than the woman who had left him. The lines of her face had deepened, and the energy that had once radiated from her seemed to have vanished. She looked defeated. As Sophie sat down across from him at the cafe, she didn't immediately speak. Instead, she sat there, her hands trembling. and her gaze fixed on the table between them. Adam could feel the weight of the silence stretching between them, thick and uncomfortable. Finally, Sophie spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm so sorry, Adam. I didn't know how to fix what I broke. I messed up." Tears welled up in her eyes, and her voice cracked as she spoke. Adam felt a pang of something, sympathy, maybe, but it quickly turned to skepticism. This wasn't the woman who had left him so easily, who had discarded their life together for the promise of wealth. This was someone broken, stripped of everything she had once craved. Through her sobs, Sophie revealed the truth Adam hadn't been prepared to hear. "Nathan, he left me," she said, her voice low, her words almost unrecognizable. "His wife found out about us. She gave him an ultimatum, me or her. And he chose her. He promised me the world, but in the end, he chose his money, his power. I was nothing to him." Her words echoed in the quiet cafe. Adam stared at her, his heart pounding. Sophie's facade had finally fallen, revealing the truth she had tried so hard to hide. Nathan had used her, just as she had used Adam. She had been so blinded by her own desires for wealth and status that she had never seen the reality of what was happening. Nathan had promised her everything, only to leave her with nothing when things got hard. Sophie's tears flowed freely now, but Adam couldn't bring himself to feel sorry for her. He had been the one left behind, the one who had been betrayed, not just by her affair, but by everything she had ever promised him. She continued, her voice growing weaker. "I have nothing now, Adam. No home, no money. I thought I'd found everything I ever wanted, but I ended up with nothing. Can you forgive me?" Adam's mind was racing. The words she was saying sounded like an echo of what she had once told him. But this time, there was no pride in her voice, no smugness. Sophie was truly at rock bottom, and for the first time, Adam realized just how much she had lost. It wasn't about the money anymore. She had lost herself in the pursuit of wealth, and now, with Nathan gone, she was left to pick up the pieces. But as much as Adam's heart ached for the woman she once was, he knew he couldn't forgive her, not yet, maybe not ever. The wounds she had left on him were too deep, and this time, he wasn't sure he could ever trust her again. Sophie's voice cracked again. But Adam stayed silent. There was nothing left to say. The woman who had once claimed to love him was now the one begging for mercy, but Adam knew that some wounds, no matter how much time passed, could never fully heal. Sophie's tearful apology seemed to echo in the space between them, but Adam remained unmoved. He could see the desperation in her eyes, the pleading for forgiveness, but all he felt was a cold, distant resolve. Sophie had destroyed everything they once had, and now she was asking him to fix the shattered remnants of their past. She had taken everything from him, the trust, the love, the life they had built together, just to chase an illusion of wealth and status. Her words felt hollow, like a tired script being recited by someone who had already made their peace with their choices. Adam had learned the harsh truth during their time apart. Sophie's desires had never been about love. It was never about them. It had always been about what she could extract from others, what she could take and consume until there was nothing left. Adam's heart had hardened. But it wasn't just bitterness. It was clarity. He had watched her trade the real for the fake, the genuine for the superficial, and in the end, it had only left her with emptiness. "You should have thought about that before you left me for a man who only cared about his own image," Adam said, his voice unwavering, cold but resolute. His words cut through the air between them like a blade. "You made your bed, Sophie. Now you have to lie in it." Sophie's face crumbled. Her lips parted to speak, to offer some excuse, some justification for her actions. She tried to explain, tried to make Adam understand that she had been lost, that she was sorry. But Adam wasn't listening. He had heard enough. Without waiting for her to finish, Adam turned and walked away. The sound of her voice calling his name was like a distant echo as he left the cafe, leaving her to face the consequences of her actions alone. He couldn't carry her burden any longer. She had chosen this path, and it was time for her to deal with the fallout. Sophie had spent so long chasing after riches, thinking that wealth could fill the emptiness she felt, that she never realized what she had lost in the process, everything that truly mattered. Now, alone, abandoned by the man who had once loved her, she was left with nothing. No home, no future, no one to turn to. Her affair had promised her the world, but all it had given her was a cold, empty reality. Adam, on the other hand, was free. Free from the weight of her lies, free from the toxic hold she had over his heart. As he walked away, there was no anger in him, no sadness, just the quiet peace of knowing he had done the right thing. He had learned to value himself, to see through the facade Sophie had created, and he was ready to move forward. He had no interest in picking up the pieces of their past. The damage was done. Sophie had been so focused on what she could gain from the world. She had never stopped to appreciate what she already had, someone who loved her, who would have done anything to make her happy. But that person no longer existed, not in her life, and not in his. Adam's future was no longer tied to Sophie's mistakes. He had learned his lesson, and now, for the first time in a long time, he felt free to rebuild his life on his own terms. No more living in the shadow of her desires. No more being the means to an end for someone who could never truly love him. As Adam looked ahead, he knew that life had more to offer. And as for Sophie, well, she had to face the bitter truth. Greed and materialism could never buy the happiness she so desperately sought. It had all come at a cost. And now, she was the one who had to live with the consequences. Thank you for listening. If you were Adam, what would you have done when faced with Sophie's betrayal? Was there a specific moment, like discovering the designer purchases or her confession, that made you realize the depth of her betrayal? Share your thoughts in the comments below. How would you have handled the situation?